Tobera's ghost. We ate fried hot dogs on Wonder Bread toast until his next paycheck came in. Mama always worried about paying the bills, raised on a labor camp with no expensive frills. Living the life where poverty kills. She lived through tragedy, she lived through pain, where the men called for severe torrential rain on her pillowcase. Sun beats down until the ocean winds cool. Cauliflower crops turned into vegetable crude. Watsonville produce leave the Pajaro train station. Gotta keep the country to feed forgotten heroes of a growing nation. Taking my mind on a visit, so much of my life tried to resist it, never realized how much I would miss it. All the dreams they planned live within us to be the best we can. That's the life that Filipinos live. Paving the way is what they had to give, and that was good enough. He carried pipes all day, watered the land, wallowed in mud till he could barely stand. Earned every dollar that passed through his hand. Sacrifice written on a sun-drenched face, all for us kids to be in a better place. Cannery and low-wage workers ending their long weekend shift. This is the song I sing to you. Taking my mind on a visit, so much of my life tried to resist it, never realized how much I would miss it. All the dreams they planned live within us to be the best we can. That's the life that Filipinos live. Taking my mind on a visit, so much of my life tried to resist it, never realized how much I would miss it. All the dreams they planned live within us to be the best we can. That's the life that Filipinos lived. Paving the way is what they had to give, and that was good enough. That was good enough. Was good enough. That was good enough. Daddy was an irrigator on the Central Coast. He was there when we needed him most.
Hi, my name is Angelo Lopez. I'm a Filipino American editorial cartoonist in the San Francisco Bay Area, and I have the deep honor today to speak to Roy Recio. Am I pronouncing your last name right? Recio?
Yes,
Okay.
Recio.
Yeah. So Roy is the founder of the Tobera Project, which aims to preserve the history of the Manong Generation of Watsonville and the Pajaro Valley area in California. And the Manong Generation refers to the Filipino Americans who came to America and settled in the West Coast during the early part of the 20th century. So thank you, Roy, for taking the time to talk to me today. And thank you, too. Your work is very important. So I thank you for your work in preserving our history.
My pleasure. My pleasure, Angelo, to be here.
Okay, sure. I guess I can start out just by asking you, what's your family background and how did you become interested in the history of the Manong generation of Watsonville and Pajaro Valley?
Well, I was born and raised in Watsonville. I was born on April 19th, 1968. And my
Oh,
father was a Manong who came to the West Coast in 1928. And he endured and persevered and, struggled to have a better life. He was amongst thousands of Filipinos who had been uh, persuaded by missionaries to come to America in search of gold and the American dream, basically. He was from the provinces of Aklan, and the missionaries and Americans had persuaded Filipinos to come to America from primarily from the Visayas, the Aklan province, as well as the Ilocos Norte and
yeah.
the Ilocos Sur region. And he was recruited basically to come work. The Manongs before him had come to Hawaii, but my dad had settled in, well, he came to Seattle first, April 22nd, 1928. And as well, my mother is half Filipino and half white, and her father, Jose Antaran Delisay, came also along with my dad, not necessarily in the same year or boat, but they had come in the same time frame. And then he married a Dust Bowl settler in Fresno, who happened to be my grandmother, of course, who was white, and she came in search of better opportunities from Oklahoma, and she was
Oh,
determined to be a Okie from Muskogee. So she was half white. My mother's half white and half Filipino, and once again, they had met in Fresno. That's on my mother's side. But indeed, my mother and father had come together in Salinas and strive for a better life. My dad, I must say, was way older than my mom because of anti-miscegenation laws, and I just come from the history, the legacy of the Manong generation, and I wanted to do something to honor and preserve the histories and stories of my parents and their generations in Watsonville.
yeah. It sounds like a very rich history and stuff. Was your grandma part of the Okies that came in the 30s, I guess?
That's right. So she was part of the John Steinbeck, Oklahoma Dust Bowl settlers.
Yeah.
They also came from Kansas as well. And there was nothing going on during the Great Depression. And they were encouraged to come to the West Coast in search of better lives and better jobs and better futures because it was during the Great Depression. And of course, that time, the West Coast was developing into the agribusiness that it is, of millions and multi-billion-dollar worth of infrastructure of agribusiness, and they needed workers. They needed workers to till the land, propagate the crops up and down the coast from say El Centro all the way to the Yakima Valley, and they just needed workers. And indeed, Watsonville, it's profoundly strawberries and apples, and pops would come and work up and down the field, up and down the West Coast, and follow the crops as migrant workers. And these were jobs that really the white man didn't want to do. And so Filipinos, they needed work, they needed jobs, and they were proficient at farming. And they really set the tone and stage for today's agribusiness to achieve and prosper. And really, they were exploited to do this kind of work because the white man, like I said, really didn't want to do 10 hours, 11 hours of stoop, back-breaking, arduous labor.
Yeah, yeah. Well, since we're talking about the Manong, generation and stuff, could you tell me a little bit about them and stuff? I mean, besides farming, did they do any other type of work? And what did they do for recreation?
Well, the Manong, they came and they did the work that, like I said, no one wants to do. And these included dishwashing jobs, houseboys, tilling the land, of course, and just, helping society grow. And once
Yeah,
again, since there's a lot of secondary labor force needs because, like I said before, 10 times the white man didn't want to do this kind of work. Basically, they had gotten little brown brothers to do this kind of work. So the
yeah,
Filipinos worked very, very hard. And once again, they were 30 to 1, 30 men to one Filipina. And they were young men, just like you, Angelo, in your younger age, wanted to go chase the ladies and see what's going on.
yeah,
Think and try and mingle. That's what young people do. And since they were mostly men and very few women, Filipinas that is, they interacted with Latinas or Mexicans, Native American folks, but predominantly with white ladies since they were around. And the
yeah,
white man didn't necessarily like to have little brown brothers, talk to, dance with, or mingle with their quote unquote ladies,
yeah.
and therefore created a lot of tension, particularly in Watsonville during the 1930s and early late 20s and such.
Can I ask, why was there such a disparity?
Well, they were called sojourners. A sojourner, much like the Chinese and Japanese before the Filipinos, they were supposed to work and work really hard, break their back, and go back home, take their quote unquote riches back
Yeah,
home and prosper. But indeed, after working, 10, 20, 30, 40 years, they didn't want to go back home, or a lot of them just kind of felt disconnected. They
yeah,
spent a lot of their time here. So the reason why they didn't go back, or you know, was because they had built their life here, even though it was a life of struggle and strife. They felt connected to America somehow or another.
oh, okay, okay. What kinds of discrimination did they face?
Well, it was during the time of slavery back in the South. We had obviously, all the Jim Crow laws and just, hangings and lynchings and such. It never came to that point, but indeed there was a lot of strife and struggle, like I said. So because Filipinos had money, it's just a little bit, of course, they had the ability to move around and dress nice and go carouse and spend their money, basically. The white man didn't like to see Filipinos, dapperly dressed and mingling with their ladies. And the
Yeah.
term before was called a dollar a day, a dime a dance. So they'd work for a dollar a day, save up their money to buy dance tickets to dance with ladies,
Uh,
at the dance halls. And mostly these ladies were white folks looking to get work, and the ladies would get a ticket and, of course, turn in their tickets and get money at the end of the evening or weekend or whatever the case may be. It's called the taxi dance. So you buy your ticket and dance, and you basically dance your whole earnings away, basically. But
yeah.
Filipinos, they're kind of extravagant, and they go, they go the extra nine sometimes, and so therefore they were dancing with the ladies. They were dapper, they were suave, they were debonair, as we all know Filipinos are. Yeah. And therefore, the white man didn't like that. So that tension of quote unquote stealing their jobs and stealing their ladies culminated in the 1930 anti-Watsonville riots. And indeed, that caused a lot of friction, a lot of tension, a lot of discrimination, but also a lot of violence during that era.
Okay. Um, I'm assuming it's mostly young Filipino men during that time that were coming because older Filipinos wouldn't be able to do that backbreaking work.
Well, you'd be surprised. Filipinos work till they're 80, in the fields. That's what they knew. In the homeland, in the barrios or the provinces or the barangay, they would, it was agrarian culture back then, particularly before industrialization and computer age, obviously. They had to do what their parents did, tilling the land with the carabao, propagating rice, calamansi, mangoes, mahogany trees, rambutan, and all the other beautiful fruits and vegetables that we have in the Philippines. So that was their way of survival, was to feed the family, and therefore they were proficient farmers. They knew what they were doing, and they were definitely skilled and professional. They had a talent that I can say Americans didn't really have, particularly when it came to you know arduous backbreaking work that they didn't want to do.
Yeah. Were they able to send money back home from what they're
Well,
being?
that was the goal. There are many instances in our group where descendants of the Manongs, like myself, there are many other of us who really started the project. But when we learned about the project and started hearing family histories, of course, there were stories about sending money home, and indeed that happened. A lot of the Manongs got overzealous with gambling, I got to say, and created families here too. But indeed, that was
Was
the
there a
goal.
lot of gambling back then
Well,
in the
yeah. Well, there's a lot of gambling now with, online betting in Las Vegas and sports gambling.
yeah, yeah.
Gambling is part of American culture, just like credit card debt.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. My parents and some of my parents' friends used to go on a bus that the church would give that the Catholic Church, our local Catholic Church would they would be trips to Las Vegas. So I never saw anything spiritual in that, but but a lot of Filipinos like going to Vegas. So
Right. And same here. The Manongs, the Filipino Community Center, Mrs. Tabasa would arrange, Mrs. Ramirez would arrange trips to Reno, maybe not Las Vegas, but Reno. They go to Reno, and the bus would leave, say, on Friday night and come back on Sunday morning or whatever the case may be. And that was just part of American culture, at least Filipino culture as well. Even at the events, the community events that were kind of insular, we would have, mahjong in the back, or pusoy dos, or
yeah.
tangits, or even cockfighting was a very formidable form of gambling in that era.
Oh yeah. Yeah, one of my fondest memories of my dad is, or my grandfather was mahjong. He would play mahjong with my relatives in the garage.
Right. And they play until 4 in the morning or all night practically, right?
Yeah, lots of laughter and stuff. That's one of my fondest memories of him and stuff. So
Right. But that was their way of recreating, after, like I said, backbreaking work and seeing their friends and cousins and, relatives. It was a good way to connect and re-examine humanity in a different frame of mind, knowing that you're maybe in a garage per se and no one's going to bug you or, you know, ostracize you or throw rocks at you or call you names. That was just their way of just bonding and celebrating culture and one another and life.
I'm assuming the discrimination bonded them and stuff.
Well, they had no choice. They were being, harassed and, being thrown off the Pajaro Bridge, being ostracized. Like I said, they couldn't vote, they couldn't buy land, they couldn't, rent or eat in certain cafes or hotels or what have you. They were basically, strung out to be on their own. They couldn't join, say, the Rotary Club or even the Women's Catholic Society at church or any other groups because they were brown, basically. And
Yeah,
even though that we have a progressive society here in California, you can still see pockets of racism here and there, and that there's always a place in Watsonville, for example, that we have kind of like a dark cloud over us, knowing that you should know your place. Knowing your place is kind of like a term that we didn't talk about, but we know that, hey, you're not necessarily welcome in the Martinelli area. You're not necessarily welcome at John's shoe store. You're not necessarily welcome at Dick Brune clothing store, for example. And growing up, you can definitely know that indeed that was a white man's world and you're not part of it, so it was always kind of like a strange feeling, a tingling on the neck, for example, that that you're stepping in territory that you're not necessarily welcome to.
so
Or,
even when you were growing up, you felt that.
oh, totally for sure. That there was a separation of the rich kids and the farm worker kids and the grower kids. There was definitely, you could tell who's dressed nice and who's not dressed nice, who has the brand new OP shirt or OP jacket, and whatever the case may be, and you're just there with your hoodie and Levi's that were handed down, for example. So that was just the reality of growing up in poverty. That indeed, even though our parents were working very hard, they earned way, way, way less than any of the other parents, for example, particularly our white peers.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You mentioned this before, but could you tell me about the Watsonville riots of 1930? And when you're talking about that, could you also tell me about who is Fermin Tobera?
So, Fermin Tobera was the martyr of the 1930 anti-Filipino race riots. He was a 22-year-old farm worker who happened to be in a bunkhouse on Murphy's Crossing labor camp, who was shot at and died, basically. So that was kind of like the end of the race riots. But in 1930, January 19th to the 24th, there were 5 days of racial tension and rioting, basically. 500 or so, even more, vigilantes of white kids or people, men, young men, they felt once again that Filipinos were stealing their jobs and stealing their women. They had come to the Beach Road, sorry, not Beach Road, the Palm Beach taxi dance out there, which is now Pajaro Dunes, very prestigious and rich area for tourists and such. But at the time, that's where the hall was at to have dances. And Filipino men would go out there. There was a trolley that took people out there as well. And there was a hall owned by the Lockpadden family who'd rent out the hall for Filipino activities, particularly dealing with taxi dances. So at the dance, and even prior to the dance, this tension had swelled because indeed George Rohrbach from North Monterey County had issued a lot of statements, really pinpointing Filipinos as, Asian peril, yellow fever, tuberculous ridden, scums of the earth, basically. So he had blamed all the ills of society, i.e., the Great Depression, on Filipinos who were stealing jobs, stealing ladies, and disturbing the fabric of American society, even though it was very poor. So there was that, juxtaposed to the white sentiment and the Filipinos needing to work, and also the growers who kept their mouths shut because indeed the Filipinos, were the labor force that made them prosperous. So
Yeah,
there's dualities and complexities of their existence here in Watsonville. But as we know that economics and, you know, earning a buck is the bottom line, where, you know, profits over people will always assail to be, you know, capitalistic points of view that America is you know, set upon. So
Yeah.
therefore, those are the, you know, keystone markers of, you know, exploiting cheap labor to gain a profit, and predominantly for the white man to excel and succeed and blame immigrants for all their ills, basically. So we
Yeah.
see that today as well. Anyways, so this tension had culminated, you know, through the newspapers, through the judge, through sentiments walking down Main Street of Filipinos, little brown brothers, and they were termed as little brown monkeys as well. So can you imagine yourself or even your family member being called a monkey while walking downtown doing your shopping or going to the post office or whatever,
Yeah.
being criticized, ostracized, and facing president um, discriminatory practices. So
Yeah.
so this tension flared up at the taxi dance where white men came to the hall with guns ablaze, and wanted to kill Filipinos. And it was other white people who actually stopped them from pursuing the torture of Filipino men at the hall. So that
Yeah.
was broken up, but indeed throughout the town, it spawned a bunch of unrest. And white men would come to labor camps and roust Filipinos, throw them off the bridge, chase them downtown, and so on. So there's a lot of history regarding this action. But indeed, Fermin Tobera, going back to him, he was shot and killed, and you know, his perpetrators were caught and rounded up. Five young men who were at the police station but never faced charges because they are all dropped. They didn't feel that Fermin Tobera's life was important enough to pursue charges, but also they let the white kids or young men off the hook
Yeah.
because it just wasn't appropriate to have a Filipino man killed in the name of a white man trying to quote unquote restore justice. So that
Right.
was always a big black hole in the Filipino community's heart. We know that that residual effect really traumatized the Manong generation, that they won't talk about it, you know, and that's as far as our parents go.
Was
Many
this
in the archive don't, parents really never talked about that episode in Filipino American history locally.
it was sort of like when a Holocaust survivor doesn't talk about the Holocaust just because it's too painful. It's similar, I guess, to the Manong generation with that incident, I guess.
Well, think about, you know, you being a parent or parents out there, uncles, aunties, and such, grandparents. How
Yeah.
do you tell your kid that I was beat up, I was rousted by five men, I was thrown rocks at, I was spit upon, people were calling me "go home monkey," we don't want you here, you have tuberculosis or whatever, and you can't be, you know, near me, for example, or hey, how you can't, you know, you're hungry, you got money in your pocket, but you can't eat here, you know, or whatever the case may be. You know, it's just that kind of sentiment is not something that you want to, I don't know, be proud about, you know. And how do you share that to your kids, saying, hey, I got beat up, I got punched in the face, you know, I got a broken arm or whatever, and tell your grandkids or kids that this is my reality. Now, of course, there are some manongs who would tell their kids, but indeed, like I said, 30 to 1. There are very few descendants of the Manongs because most of the Manongs did not marry. And that's why we have the project, because
Yeah,
the ones who are
there,
descendants are the ones who are really telling the stories, because we're so lucky that we had parents and who have a family, but the majority of the Manongs did not have families.
yeah. Well, you mentioned your grandparents. Was it tough being an interracial couple during that time? I'm sure they must have faced a lot of discrimination. You know, your grandma being an Okie and your grandpa being Filipino. Was that tough?
I would have to say so too. You know, because of the anti-miscegenation laws, families or couples, they couldn't marry in California due to these laws. They had to go to other states, for example, you know, New Mexico and Washington.
Yeah.
So there was this thing called the Honeymoon Express. It was buses taking Filipino men and white ladies to get married, say, in New Mexico. So the bus
Oh,
would travel from California to New Mexico and, you know, get married, share their vows, but also ride the bus back. Now,
yeah.
I don't know what happened at midnight because that's a long ride, you know, going through the desert, you know. But I don't want to know. But those are things that happened, you know. But as far as, you know, Filipinos go, a lot of times, you know, when a couple was married, they couldn't necessarily buy land, and so therefore the woman would have to put her name on the property, for example, or sympathetic white people would, put their name on the lease for a Filipino to have a business, for example. So these are the kind of issues that they face. They couldn't necessarily live in certain areas. They weren't allowed to live, quote unquote, in the Martinelli area. And even with burials, they didn't want to have, Filipinos in certain grave sites and, you know, um, certain cemeteries because they were brown, even though they were dead. As well,
But
there's just
their
certain.
skeletons are white. Everybody's skeletons look the same, so it shouldn't matter.
Right, we
Right.
see them. We see them all on Halloween, though. But as far as the name, Santos or whoever your last name is,
Yeah.
it's not a Smith, it's not a Taylor, it's not a Jones. So
Is there a cemetery in Watsonville I can go to that has Filipinos buried there, or is
yeah, there. And of course, this is like back in the day. This now we're coming of age where people are more embracing and more tolerant, for example. But indeed, I know that there just was that sentiment, even like with the church you talked about earlier. There were separations of the Filipino Catholics Association because indeed the Catholic people, even though they're church going, God fearing, they just don't want to have little brown people, in their group, basically. So there
oh,
are factions of Filipino groups under the Catholic umbrella, to share, religion, but they just couldn't intermingle with the white people, for example.
even in the Catholic Church there was racism?
Oh yeah. Well, there's always been racism in the Catholic Church. Look at
Yeah, 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 yeah.
look,
That was
look
a
at that.
stupid statement.
What?
That was a stupid statement.
Right, right.
Yeah, yeah.
You don't have to go
Oh,
very far to go to the what's it called, Angelo? The San Juan Bautista Carmel mission. The missions they were built by the Native American peoples, really.
yeah, yeah, that's right. Yeah. There's a controversy about Father Sarah because of that, I think, right? So,
Yeah, definitely. He enslaved the Native Americans to do that.
yeah.
Yeah, there's you can even and honestly, to be honest with you too, when you go to the tour at say San Juan Bautista, they're very frank about what had happened, which is progress. So
Yeah, yeah, yeah. The weird, with me, the ironic thing with me, I'm married to a white woman from Watsonville, but she came to Watsonville with her family in 1974. They didn't know about the Watsonville riots or the way the Filipinos were treated back then and stuff. But I'm grateful for your grandparents because they suffered through a lot. They made it possible for me to marry my wife today because yeah, I didn't have to go through the crap that they went through, it back what 50, 60 years ago and stuff.
right. So part of what, the Tobera Project, which is a community-driven project, has teamed with UC Santa Cruz, which is called the WITH, or Watsonville is in the Heart. They're more the academics, and where Tobera is more of the, community-driven, grassroots, people power type of movement. But one of the things that we push for is to have a curriculum developed to have ethnic studies, and part of our local ethnic studies is talking about analyzing the 1930 anti-Filipino Watsonville race riots, talking about the effects and just the get down of what happened. Because indeed, as you said, your wife never really had that discussion or was it brought to her attention. But now that we have the ability to really, foster the educational component and examine it more deeply, it's going to be instituted in the Pajaro Valley Unified School District, is the component of the 1930 anti-Filipino race riots for people to understand and really get a grasp of. I tell you, I think that the dominant society doesn't want to have this, chapter of American history known because it makes them feel uncomfortable. But, we as brown people walking out the door, we always felt uncomfortable, but no one
Yeah,
cared. Carol cared about that. But indeed, this is the truth, to validate our truth, to really, embrace the truth, whether it be bad, good, or indifferent, is part of education, part of, growing as a community, as a society, to know about every nook and cranny about everyone's background, basically.
yeah. So America doesn't make the same mistake again. That's the thing that history is supposed to teach. We learn from our mistakes, but if we don't learn from it, you and I will be in trouble again. But
Well,
since
that's a whole different discussion, Angelo.
well,
Particularly in this day and age.
yeah, but since you're mentioning the Tobera Project and stuff, tell me about it and stuff. What would you tell me more?
Well, my mom died in 2018, and she, like I said, was way younger than my dad. My dad had died in 2002. So I just felt like, with my mom's passing, that I needed to do something to honor their legacy, their history, basically. So I had been an organizer before in San Francisco with the I Hotel and the Filipino World War II Veterans Equity Campaign for many, many, many years.
That's
And
so
we helped
cool.
build back the I Hotel for low-income housing. But I had learned from my mentors that indeed, to educate, to collaborate, to organize, and to mobilize, to move the community forward, that if we don't do this work, no one else is going to do it for you. So therefore, I had done a lot of work in San Francisco regarding land use and anti-gentrification matters, but I never did anything for Watsonville. And this was always my, something I wanted to do for my hometown, particularly with my parents, honoring my parents. So I
Yeah.
got like-minded folks who were also descendants of the Manongs, because when I was a kid, we would always have community events. And so I kind of knew people. But even though I was from Watsonville, I had left Watsonville as a young man to go, see what's out there. So I had lived in different parts of the country and did different things, but my heart was always in Watsonville. So
Yeah.
when mom died, I wanted to do something to honor them. So I knew that indeed to do that, I couldn't do it by myself, of course. That's a lot of work. But to lead an endeavor, it does takes, leaders lead basically. So we had all these things to do, and one of them was to have a community call out. A community call out is when people bring their artifacts, photos, family heirlooms and such, art pieces. My dad's old fedora hat. Just things like that you'll show in the pictures that people have to make a calendar. So our big thing to do was make a calendar, and every year, last 5 years, we have a calendar. And each, calendar has 12 months, of course. So therefore, there'd be like 10 or 11 families in the calendar to
Yeah.
talk about, 6 paragraphs of your family history, 5 to 6 pictures to show the distinctness and, the livelihood of your family. So families got kind of involved and said, hey, I know that family. I know the Falarina family. I know the Sulai family. If
Yeah.
they can do it, I can do it too. So then in the pictures, because we're a very tight-knit community, you can see a photo and you can say, hey, that's my uncle in the background. Hey, my mom's with the women's club too, like your mom. And
Yeah.
people said, hey, I want to participate as well. To really galvanize a lot of support, and then to make it, uh, to validate the project, we formed a partnership with UC Santa Cruz. So in American society, the way to really get your stories told and embedded or institutionalized is having it in the higher education ivory tower, quote unquote. So therefore, our stories with this partnership with UC Santa Cruz has really propelled us to really talk about the project on more so basically. So therefore, all of our community events, we've done a lot of things, which is great, but it took a lot of people power and also the help of these scholars at UC Santa Cruz who really helped us out. So we have many successes, and we're very proud of the work we've done thus far. But the highlight is the Watsonville is in the Heart oral and digital archive, which really houses a lot of the family stories, whether it be interviews or family heirlooms or just critiques of our community. It really gives a bird's eye view and deeper understanding of what the Manongs had gone through our own words. It's
Yeah.
one thing to have a scholar or a white man tell you, hey, this is the way it was, but for us to really espouse and expand on what we saw, what we lived, what we know as our truth is really, embedded in the archive at Watsonville is in the heart.
Okay. Can you also tell me about the community digital archive? Is that the same?
Yeah, it's the same thing. So the
Oh,
Tobera Project is the community portion of it. We're just, we have events like, the FAM Festival, the Filipino American History Month Festival. We have, just, parole making workshops. We do screenings of different films and have discussions. We have, cookouts and barbecues and things like that as a community. But we've also done things to really, you know, really in succinct with UC Santa Cruz, talk about our histories basically. So there's a community component of, and there's a educational component of the project, which is really a partnership that honestly, that America or East, there's very few times that, these histories are told and brought to life, with the community university partnership. So it's cool that, our little small farm town has done this great archive where, so you'd think, boy, oh boy, in Seattle or LA or San Francisco or Chicago, those communities would be doing the same kind of thing. But for our little small town, farm town, it's really quite, an honor to do this work and knowing that we're a shining star. So it's kind of cool. So like I said, there's many different components of the project. One is called Dear Watsonville, which is a film. It got a lot of acclaim. It's a graphic novel style film because all the young people, they want to be filmmakers. So, but it got a lot of acclaim in Brooklyn and Cincinnati and in San Diego, and it's soon to be coming to San Francisco in
Oh,
the Asian American Film Festival, hopefully soon. And it's just a synopsis of three members of our group telling their family histories, and it's Joanne and Manuel and Dan telling how life was, as a kid growing up. And it's really brought to life with graphic novel style accuracy. And it's just a fun, engaging film called Dear Watsonville that I'd encourage everyone to check out.
should it be coming out this year?
It's already out. It came out last year. But
Okay.
it's already been to film festivals in Cincinnati, Brooklyn, San Diego. It's coming to the Bay Area very soon.
Okay, yeah, I think the San Francisco Film Festival's next month, right? So maybe it'll be
I
there.
believe so.
Okay.
Hmm.
Oh, that's so cool and stuff. So, oh, okay. Well, before I say anything else, I want to thank you because I mean you worked on the you seem to have a lifetime of FilAm activism and stuff. Was that rewarding for you and helpful for you and um well, thank you for that and stuff. But
Well, no, as a kid, I was honestly, I was in scouting all my, childhood life, my brother and I was an Eagle Scout, and I always had a sense of community. My parents were always involved in the community. Whether it's, the women's club or dad going to the Dimasalang fraternal lodge meetings or whatever Filipino community events were going on, we were also stalwarts at the hall. So I knew that I was part of something. Even though I was trying to find myself out there, I knew I was part of something. And then after college and after living in the Philippines and Japan, I came to San Francisco and kind of got. I was a reporter for the Philippine News of all things, and you're never supposed to mix your professional reporting and getting involved with the community event. That's two different things that you should never always not mix apples and oranges basically.
yeah.
But I got involved with iHotel really, and my mentors, Manong Robles, Bill Sorrow, Emil de Guzman, they were the ones who kind of took me under the wing and showed me how to really organize the people and fight for a cause because, in this world of being Filipino American, we need to have a seat at the table. We need to have our voices heard. And they did it in a cordial, steadfast, and not an aggressive manner, but in a in your face manner that was, that you couldn't deny basically.
Uh,
So I learned how to deal with people. I learned how to fight. I learned how to organize. I learned how to go through the political process, go through the logistical process of, fighting for what you believe in to achieve social and economic justice. So therefore, I had learned all these traits and skills from my mentors. And indeed, I knew, like I said before, I had done some great work in San Francisco, but never did nothing for Watsonville. And I felt, kind of remiss that indeed I had done all this work, but nothing for my hometown. And I felt like it was something I needed to do to honor my parents, like I said.
Thank you. Well, thank you for coming back, Roy, and stuff. Did you have anything else to add, or should I go to the next question?
No, so far so good. Like I said, it's a pleasure to be here. So let's move it forward, and hopefully I can address and be entertaining and insightful.
You already are being insightful and entertaining, so thank you and stuff. But okay, I'm curious. With with all this work that you've done, what has been the most rewarding thing about working on the Tobera project? And if for somebody who wants to learn more, how could they learn more about the Tobera project and the Watsonville is in the Heart Research Initiative?
Those are good questions, Angelo. But amongst the pictures, one of the most important things that, it's all about building relationships. Whether it's your community, your neighborhood, your work colleagues, whatever, it's all about, fostering and forming relationships with folks that you love and gain love for, and to have their voices heard and and respected and appreciated, and their stories. As a community, we all come together And like I said, a lot of us had left Watsonville to pursue our American dream or what have you. And, you know, coming back together to talk about our parents and show respect. The term is in Tagalog, utang na laob, which is our debt of gratitude to our parents. So to pay that debt of gratitude to our parents and show respect and honor them, dignify their stories, and just share love and culture and our heritage. That's really the reward. Me, sure, I'm the leader and do my thing and whatever else. But indeed, it's the conversations and just the side talk we have with one another and amongst themselves that really bring people together. I couldn't do this without them, basically, and to have them show me and show each other a great deal of love and respect. That's important to me to know that indeed we're all in this together. We're all in this together.
Yeah. Is it sort of like paying a debt of gratitude for your parents and for the community?
Well, that's what that's being Filipino. That's what you do. What are the terms for the 11 words? Without me, you would not be alive. Those are the words that they give you as kids. So therefore,
Yeah.
that's what we have. Hanging over our heads, whether we're Catholic or not. That's that's what they give us as far as giving us the grief and the guilt. That's part
Yeah.
of the context of being Filipino.
Yeah, I know that very well. Yeah, I'm curious though. Okay, for somebody who doesn't know about this, how can they learn about both the Tobera Project and Watsonville?
Well, everything is on digital on the website. So it's toberaproject.com is our website for the community aspect of it. But really the gold winner prize is the Watsonville is in the Heart Oral and Digital Archive, which is at www.wiith.ucsc.edu. But even at Google, you can put Watsonville's in the Heart and you'll see our archive. So the archive is it's very thorough, man. Like it has a lot of information, kind of like you can get lost up in there, listening to all the there's like 50 oral history interviews. There's all kinds of artifacts to peruse and observe and see. As well as there's little, trinkets of information, whether it be more details about the Watsonville race riots, about cockfighting, about women's, you know, uh, uh, importance in the community,
Yeah,
just different aspects of as only educators and scholars would dig deep to find out. But it's for if you're like totally into Filipino American history, this is up your alley because it's really cool. And once again, if any other communities want to emulate it, we're more than happy to help other communities, get involved, share the knowledge, and show how to do this kind of work. But really, it starts with you. Like I can talk until I'm blue in the face about urging other communities, whether it's the Portuguese community or the Japanese community or whoever.
yeah,
But it takes work, man. It's a lot of work. It's a labor of love. But work, as you know, Angelo, is a four-letter word. So if you want to dig deep, you got to be willing to put in the work. But if you find that it's rewarding to you and you feel it's important to you, you'll do it.
yeah.
Therefore, everyone in the group is feeling that it's important to us to really dig deep and do the work.
Is you find it's a good way of connecting generations, younger Filipinos with older Filipinos?
Oh yeah. So just 2 days ago, I was speaking to, well, maybe 3 days ago, I was speaking to a class at UC Santa Cruz and talking about, the importance of our history, but knowing your history, why your parents are here, and what are you doing here, and what are you going to contribute to either your parents, your community, or even yourself. Like having a sense of grounding, having a sense of belonging, having a sense of love for yourself, to really embrace who you are and share that with the world. It's a beautiful thing to know that indeed you're part of something and you're a legacy of your parents' truth, and to really, flourish, but also spread that love and conviction, in your community is a beautiful thing.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you for doing that and stuff. But okay. This is my last question, and it's a two-part question.
Sure.
Okay. The first part, why is it important for Filipinos and I guess Americans in general to learn about the Manong generation? And the second part, with the rise today in anti-immigrant sentiment, what lessons can we learn from the Manong generation?
Well, it's important to learn about the Manongs because really they're not really highlighted in textbooks or in curriculum. So therefore, their stories, which is our responsibility to share and tell, is important. I remember in college, it was an ethnic studies class I took. It was only like a paragraph about the Manongs, about how they were dapper and the Americans didn't like them, but they were dapper and hardworking. But there was no other context to that. There was no other definition or no other expanding upon. It was just like a one paragraph about the Filipinos in America. And I thought that was so pathetic. So now that we had the power, and it's about Filipinos having voice and power and involvement and influence to really institute our ideas and our wherewithal to be in part of the American curriculum and educational textbooks and such. If we don't do this work, no one's going to do it for us. So therefore, it's our responsibility. We hold ourselves accountable. And of course, we work with others. It's always being Filipino, that it's not always a Filipino thing. Of course, we're very, very, very proud to be Filipinos, but we're also very embracing of everybody else. And that's one thing, one trait about Filipinos that's beautiful.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And the
Oh,
other question about immigrants now and today, really, boy, oh boy, looking at the Filipino history, because we know that Chinese folk were brought to the West Coast and then Japanese folk and Filipino folk, and then the Bracero Project, who brought Mexican folk to work in the lands. Now we're seeing that Honduras folk and even different indigenous tribes in South America and in the Central America region, Guatemala and so on, they're working the lands, and they're just being scapegoated upon what's going on, all the ills, quote unquote, of American fabric. We talked about tuberculosis and yellow fever and Asian peril, but there's a whole new set of terms or definitions that they're imposing on immigrants. And indeed, when you look at it as well, no one's going to do that work. Even in our group, us being Filipino Americans, there's no one in our group that works the fields because we know how hard, backbreaking, arduous labor that is,
yeah,
and no one wants to do that work. And indeed, we need workers. And therefore, when we stop that immigration line of people coming in to do that work, we're going to really suffer as a country. And because they don't address, or the Congress people or Senate people don't address immigration standards or practices or even concerns or laws, then we're going to have that conundrum of who's going to grow your lettuce? Who's going to produce your tomatoes? Who's going to pick your strawberries? Because it sure ain't the hell going to be Americans want to do that job,
yeah,
unfortunately. And they have to figure out a way because you can't just scapegoat immigrants and say, okay, we're gonna clean house and get them all out of town. You're going to be left with a lot of you know emptiness and
yeah, yeah.
unfulfilled prophets that are just going to be dying on the vine per se.
Yeah, I remember what you said about white Americans being uncomfortable about learning some of the history and stuff. But I always feel like we're not trying to attack white Americans. We're just trying to make sure they don't make the mistake of oppressing black and brown people again and stuff. We want them to learn from their history so they don't make the same mistakes, right? And
Well,
stuff.
that's also part of the truth or untruth about Americans or white folks is that some of them don't want to have Filipinos known in their history. They don't want to talk about slavery or Jim Crow laws or Rosa Parks or anything like that. That's not quote unquote white history. So
Yeah,
we need to figure out exactly what is history and who should be writing those history books and who should be validating this history.
yeah, yeah. If they don't learn that history, they're going to make the same mistakes, and black and brown people are going to wind up being oppressed again and stuff. But that's what we're trying to avoid and stuff. So,
Well,
yeah,
the clearing out of the Department of Education, we're
yeah.
going to see. We're going to keep our fingers crossed. Basically, hold on tight.
Okay. I'm curious. It just occurred to me. Does that affect the Tobera Project or Watsonville in Heart in any way or no?
Well, as far as our steadfast ethnic studies curriculum, it's always been there's always pushback, particularly with leaders, they who have the power. Although we're climbing up the socioeconomic ladder and political ladder and such, we still don't have power, and the power brokers are the ones who are going to decide. But we have to keep and hold them accountable to make sure that our stories are told. It's never a done deal. The struggle is always going to be going to be the struggle. That's just the way capitalism and the American stratification of society works. Like you're always going to have people putting the foot on people's throats, basically.
Yeah.
And that's just capitalism at its finest.
Yeah. Okay. Well, okay. On that happy note.
God
uh,
bless America.
so okay. Okay. Well, I think that's about it for my questions and stuff. Do you have
Oh,
anything to add or no?
no, just that's a pleasure to be here with you, Angelo. And I thank you for doing your work because indeed, like I said, if we don't do the work, there's no one else going to do it for us.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, and thank you too for your work too and stuff.
Thank you.